Everyone, to our another Tuesday night talk. And it's wonderful to see everyone. It's a great opportunity again just to stay connected, to see people. And we have a very interesting talk and discussion for tonight, which I'm sure we'll all learn a lot and find very interesting. That's my expectation. And our speaker tonight is Rabbi Dr. Alan Brill. Professor Brill holds the Cooperman Ross Endowed Chair for Jewish Christian Studies at Seton Hall University, where he teaches Jewish studies in their Department of Religion and also in their Jewish Christian Studies graduate program. Professor Brill received his BA, his master's, and his smicha from Yeshiva University, and his Ph.D. from the Department of Theology at Fordham University. He has authored several books, numerous articles over topics including Jewish mysticism, modern Jewish thought, contemporary orthodoxy, and interfaith theology. You can, if this talk piques your interest, if you've read Professor Brill's writings, or if not, you can learn more about him and his writings at his Kavana blog, which has a lot of interesting things all the time. In 2014, Professor Brill won a prestigious Fulbright Senior Scholar Award for research and teaching at, I hope I'm pronouncing everything correctly, the Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi, Uttar Pradesh in India. I've never been there, but I look forward to hearing about it. And he taught there, and based on his experiences in India, what he learned, what he taught, he recently published a book entitled A Rabbi on the Ganges, a Jewish Hindu Encounter. And I believe we're going to be hearing about that tonight. Another point that is not generally included in his official academic resumes and bios, but he is also a former teacher at the Maimonides School. And so that's a point of interest and a point of pride for us here.
I actually learned everyone part that's not there is the fact that I used to run the summer kollel when Rav Soloveitchik gave shir. And so that's why I actually learned about the community, arranging housing and meals for everybody.
Oh, wow,
so
fascinating.
It goes back a long way.
I bet there's some good stories in there. And other people who eventually became all-stars in the Jewish community. We have two sponsors tonight. One is actually connected to that point. We want to thank Ari Bahar, who is a former student of Rabbi Dr. Brill from those days. And he thanks his teacher, and we thank you, Ari, for sponsoring tonight. And we also have another sponsor who wishes to remain anonymous. We thank that person for their generosity and their support for this entire program and series. Before I turn it over to Rabbi Dr. Brill, just two other sort of technical points. One, this is being recorded, so everyone understands that, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel after a few days. And also, there will be time for questions, but we're going to ask everyone tonight to keep their questions till the last section of time that we have. And when Rabbi Dr. Brill is ready for that, there will be an opportunity for reactions and questions. And with that, I'm certainly very excited. And Professor Brill, please begin.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back in Brookline on some level. A lot of nice time on Beale Street. And like I said, I'll take the questions at the end. So this talk comes out of my time in India. I won a Fulbright scholarship for 2013-14 to teach in India and to research in India. And it came out of a prior book that I wrote, Judaism and World Religions. I had a chapter on Jewish texts about Hinduism and Buddhism, because people had never really paid much attention to that fact that we mentioned those texts. And when I was in India, besides my research, I taught an introduction to Judaism, and I taught an introduction to religion from a Western point of view. When I taught, they were very surprised that Judaism does not have animal sacrifices anymore. They read Leviticus Judaism is Leviticus. Therefore, we have animal sacrifices. That should be a given. Then the next line is, oh, your reform movement in the 19th century got rid of them. So it's a very recent phenomenon, was the next thing they asked me. And then I had to explain, no, that's not true. And then I had to explain what the Talmud was, what Rabbinic Judaism is. And the person who normally even taught Judaism on the university level had never heard of the Talmud. For him, Judaism is obviously the Hebrew Bible and then contemporary Jewry. This is important because this works the other direction also. Anything you know about Hinduism is equally incorrect. Anything you know about Hinduism that you read the Vedas is like reading Leviticus. Anything you know that you think you once heard about Hinduism in a survey book is like their books about Judaism. There is also, don't trust any statement, generalization, stereotype, anything you find on Google or almost any textbook before 1980 on Hinduism. Among other reasons is there were no Hindus in America. You couldn't come into America until 1965. So the limits of knowledge, of firsthand knowledge, were incredible to know about what was going on. People do not know what's going on. And the same way Judaism has not the religion of Vayikra, they're not the religion of their ancient texts. Second thing is a question that I got asked about once a week. What do I think of Hitler? They know very little about even the Western world because their World War II went through Indochina, through Japan. They know nothing about the Western Front, as little as you're going to know about the Japanese in Indonesia and Burma. They don't really put it all together. They couldn't find Poland on a map. As much as you can't find the pre-World War II map of extended Indo and Indochina region to actually, unless you specialize in it, to find it on a map. So that's a big point also. Now, Hinduism is actually many religions that used to be separate that came together in the last 300 years. It's complex, it's multi-leveled, it goes in many directions. They don't worry about consistency. And India is a big country with 1.2 billion people. And so what Hinduism is really many religions coming together. And know that any obscure sect in India has more members than there are Jews in the world, or certainly more members than there are Jews in America. So there's always when we say we have a great break-off Hasidic group and we say it's got 4,000 members, there it'll have 10 million members. So any exception to a rule has serious numbers in India. So bear that in mind. Know that India also has 19 separate languages, official ones. It has over 100 in general. So therefore, English is the official language because the 19 can't all speak each other's language. And the North and the South keep completely separate festivals. Imagine if Jews in America and Jews in Israel kept slightly different versions of Passover on different days with significantly different rules. That's the way it is in India. In general, if you want to break their religion up into various religions, they have Vaishnavism, which is the coming together of 30 ancient religions, and that's why they have many manifestations, because they gave equal time to all the manifestations. They have Shaivitism or Shaivism, which is one God, only worshiping a Matseva, no representation, no manifestations, no incarnations, one God, Shaivism. Shaktiism is a feminine version of that. They have Smarta, which is the religion of the ashrams that believe there's one reality over all and everything else is just an illusion for human needs. But they all will then use this term Hinduism for all of the above. I want to make a thought experiment before I go further to let you understand the diversity of Hinduism. We all know that when Yeravam set up the golden calves in Beit El and Dan in Malachim Perek Yudbet, he was censured as being that's not appropriate to set up other cities besides Jerusalem. The Hindu philosopher Ramakrishna said, what's the problem with it? Yeravam did great because in a country the size of India, we need temples all over the place. And so what if they diverge in their practices? But the point is this way, everybody has a temple that they can go up to. So that's also India, because it's larger than any place Jews have ever lived, will then create many temples. And you know all those prohibitions in Devarim about putting up a pillar, worshiping a tree, a minor deity, an astral body? Well, remember, Abraham put up a pillar, Yaakov put up a pillar in Genesis. It's only Devarim that said you can't do it. Here in India, we're not going to tell the common people not to do it. As philosophers, we're not going to do it. But for the common people, we're going to let them continue to do all of the things that Deuteronomy prohibits. If we come to Eliyahu and Har Carmel, it became a standoff between Eliyahu and Baal, and the priest of Baal. If this was India, they would have then said, no, you know what, let's not fight. It says in Malachi, Perek Aleph, my name will be great among the nations, from where the sun will to where it sets. In every place, incense and pure offerings will be brought to me, because my name will be great among the nations. And therefore, Hashem and Baal are really one. There's no need to fight. We all have the same good intentions if this was India. And we can go on with this sort of pattern. Imagine if we had never separated out from Sadukim, from the Dead Sea sect. They tended to always take an inclusive path rather than an exclusive path. But let me tell you a story. I'm going to play off the story of Abraham. Okay, everybody knows the famous Midrashic story, goes back to Bayit Sheni, in which Terach runs an idol shop. He goes out to run an errand. He goes out to the 7-Eleven, and he comes back, and all his idols are broken except for one with an axe in it. And Abraham says they got into a fight over an offering, and the biggest one shattered all the other ones. And everyone knows that story. But let's tell it if this was India. Terach would have said, are you a moron? The Hindu statues are used to bring the infinite divine to mind. We need a representation. We can only show devotion to an image. We can't worship with an abstraction. And Abraham would say, but there's only one immaterial God. Terach would say, but we live in a sensory material world. That's why the Torah gave us a Mishkan. That's why the Torah will give, in the future, will give mitzvot. We need tangible aspects in order to worship. We can't be abstract. Abraham would say, but you think they're actually alive. Terach would say, give me a break. They're made of wood and clay. We only use them as representation, and we only treat them as real when we consecrate them in the temple as an act of representation. And in fact, when we're done with it, we actually leave them out in the rain or throw them into the sea in order to show that they have no intrinsic value. All over India, you'll see these decaying papier-mâché statues because you want to show they have no status. And then Terach would go, Abraham, have you ever seen a golden calf move? Your straw man arguments don't work. Do you think the Kruvim actually move in the Mishkan? Abraham's automatically going to say, yes, they do. They turn to each other. Chazal said they turn toward each other and away from each other. Terach would have said, boy, you're anthropomorphic. Maybe you should study the Guide of the Perplexed or maybe Shankara's commentary on the Brahma Sutras. Abraham would then say, but she brought them food to eat. How can these statues eat? Terah would have said, she didn't feed them. What did she do? She made an offering. And an offering is not the same as thinking she thought they were going to eat. And Abraham would go, no, she did think they were going to eat. Terah would go, please try to assume other people are on the same level of sophistication as you are. And an offering does not involve literal eating. Abraham is going to answer, but I discovered the heaven and earth and everyone else is primitive. Terah's going to go, I can't wait until you're out of adolescence. But if God ever says to you to offer your son on a mountain, please think about what an offering means and how it may not mean actual sacrifice. With that sort of introduction to set out many of the issues I want to deal with, let's start with my getting to, before I got to India, everyone who had a Fulbright, we met in a restaurant. And for whatever reason, the people from the Midwest got there first, and the Jews and the Hindus got there last, whatever stereotype is in that. And they pre-ordered for us. They didn't ask who can eat what, but that's a separate story. And automatically we got into a debate at the table, the Jews and the Hindus, about immediately whether fish counts as meat or fish counts as parav. In Bengalis, consider fish as parav like Jews, while Gujaratis consider it as meat. And we got into an even bigger debate over mushrooms, because neither Jews nor Hindus consider mushrooms a vegetable. For us, it's a shahako, and it's some sort of parasite, which is what Hindus consider also, and many Hindu groups will therefore not serve mushrooms, at least on many occasions. There's a commonality between Judaism and Hinduism that goes back to basic taxonomy. Both religions make taxonomies. And if anyone knows Mary Douglas, most of it fits not just Vayikra, it fits Hinduism. Now, I taught in Banaras Hindu University, which, as the name says, is a Hindu university. And it was very similar to places like Yeshiva University. Meaning I was very used to it. Everybody kissed the book when they were done. The pious students would not even pay attention, even kiss their dictionaries. It was a co-ed school, but obviously you couldn't put on a play that was co-ed. You couldn't have a boy and a girl touch. So what they did is they gave the male lead to a girl, so the hero and heroine can hold hands. And the men all had the background bit parts that didn't have to touch anybody. And it's something very similar used to how a day school works its way around these things. And even afterwards, when they gave everyone a flower as a congratulations for being in the play, you had to make sure the men from the male dean and the women from the female dean, and one person once got in the wrong line, and it created a whole thing. No, you can't do it. Now, if this had been an ultra-Orthodox Hindu school, there would have never been a co-ed play. If it was a modern secular Indian school, there would have never been a problem of touching. But it was the fact that it was a school that was co-ed, modern, and religious, was a certain familiarity that I understood exactly the sort of games they were playing. So too, a lot of things that were on campus were very much things I was used to. For example, there were 2 ice cream stands on campus. Both of them were technically vegetarian, but one of them was strictly veg. So obviously I had to ask, what was the difference between the strictly vegetarian and the vegetarian? And the answer was the vegetarian one that's not strict uses sprinkles, and they have a problem of resinous glaze, while those who are strict only ate at the ice cream stand that did not use sprinkles. Complete problems that I understood from my Jewish background, which leads into the point that when I'm looking at in Hinduism, I'm looking at a Hinduism that corresponds to my Judaism, meaning I'm looking the same way I take Reb Soloveitchik as definer of what Torah means. I don't take the person who's selling me red strings at the kotel to define what Judaism is. I take the people who are giving lectures on Hinduism, who come with their PowerPoints and their CD-ROMs of Hindu scripture to define what Hinduism is. I don't take the colorful characters selling you trinkets in the street as the representative to define what the religion is. Okay, that's a big thing. I'm comparing like to like. Okay, now this is not the first time Jews have discovered Hinduism. Now, on some level, there was a trade between Solomon's Israel and India. You have all these Tamil words in Song of Songs, Cooperman and others, which go back to Tamil. In the Middle Ages, you have a whole literature that got translated from Hindu languages into Arabic, Persian, and Hebrew. Most of these translations are ascribed to the Ibn Ezra, for better or worse. But this includes the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, and others were available to the medievals. And what's noticeable is that the word diva was translated as angel, malach or malakaya, not as gods. To translate divas as gods was a Christian activity of the 17th century that wanted to say, look, Christianity is correct and they're incorrect by having many divas. But know that medieval Jews and medieval Muslims did not make that mistake. Even in their very translations, you can see that. If you've ever looked, Sadhya Gaon in the full edition talks about various Hindu, Buddhist, and other Indian positions. He calls them the Brahmins. Various other medieval scholars, people you tend not to read, know this material. A lot of the super commentaries in Ibn Ezra, the Meiri, and others. When you move to the age of exploration, Rav Menashe ben Israel in Amsterdam, time of the East India Company, and Jews are now doing business not just in New York, but doing business in Indonesia and India. Wrote several books on other religions. And Menashe ben Israel goes out of his way to quote the verse in Malachi that wherever they're turning to God is God. And he does this as a polemic against the Christian missionaries who said that all the religions of India are superstitions and primitive and pagan and vile. Menashe ben Israel goes out of his way to say no. Menashe ben Israel is also the one who creates the myth that the religions of the East are the gifts that Abraham gave to the concubines. The actual midrash goes back earlier, but the shift it to actually be Eastern religions is Menashe ben Israel. And we'll find lots of figures. For example, the sacred books of the East were reviewed in the Mizrahi Journal when they came out, with all sorts of interesting Mizrahi rabbis trying to create commonalities between Judaism and Torah. And the place that it really became that Jews discovered India once again for the first time is in 2004 with the Shaitel controversy. For some reason, Jews woke up in 2004 and just realized, this human hair, it's coming from a temple in India. And I was a minor border crosser because I was actually called, along with several other people I know, to try to head it off at the pass the day before. But those at the other end of the phone there was nothing we could do to explain it to them, because for them it was Hinduism, Buddhism, Markulis, all the same, because they kept repeating, is it giving an Evan to Markulis? They just kept asking the same Talmudic Greco-Roman questions in which no explanation that we could give of Hinduism played any role. And we compared notes, all of us who got called, that none of us were able to get through to explain what was going on. Now, on top of it, they really didn't understand, and they assumed for whatever reason that all hair was a sacrificial offering, even though nobody gives hair as an offering. They assumed that the garbage can the hair is put in was a god because it was stainless steel. I mean, they made all sorts of bad assumptions, which we'll come back to later on. The next point where it went forward was in 2007. There was a Hindu-Jewish summit in India where the chief rabbinate visited India, visited the grounds of the Aksharadham Temple. So you have a Maserav that the chief rabbinate only considered the temple itself, the temple, not the entire, not the entire half a mile circumference grounds on all sides of gardens and parks. And they issued a declaration that Hinduism accepts one supreme being and monotheism. The second meeting was in Yerushalayim in 2008, where both sides agreed that they both recognize one supreme being, creator and guide of the cosmos, shared values, and the rabbinate signed on to, it is recognized that one supreme being, both in its formless and manifest aspects, has been worshipped by Hindus over the millennia. This does not mean that Hindus worship gods or idols. The Hindus relate to only one supreme being, but he or she prays to a particular manifestation. And I took part in the third meeting in 2009. Hold on a second. So already the rabbis signed off on this. But now let's get back to my time in India. I was there when I arrived in India. Okay, it took a long time to get settled, but as you know, this Rosh Chodesh Kislev is the festival of Diwali in India. It's an entire Indian subcontinent festival. It's the festival of lights, celebrated by not just Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, by everybody. It's even a national holiday in Malaysia, which is an Islamic country, meaning you've got to separate out things that are cultural versus things that are religious. Like our debates here, is New Year's Eve a religious holiday? Well, you can claim once upon a time, but you have to understand how Diwali is celebrated all over India by everyone. I asked Indian Jews, what do they do? And they say they go to the festivals in the street. They don't go to anything in a temple or have anything that ever has to do with worship. But civil holidays like Diwali, they take part in. And I was out there when I got on a boat on the Ganges. And we're floating at night on the Ganges. It's an entire boat of Sanskrit scholars who live in India and all of us visiting scholars from abroad. We're going down down the river. It's a moonlit night. We see all the displays of lights on the shore. And at some point, I turned to the Sanskrit scholar next to me and saying, look at all those people on the shore. They're lighting candles in specific arrangements. What happens if they make a mistake in the lighting of the candles? The Christian sitting to my left says, don't make fun. The Sanskrit scholar and that says, no, it's a very good question. Saying that they all know what to do. They've all been practicing and they don't make a mistake. But even if you make a mistake, there's a distinction between an intentional mistake and a not unintentional mistake. Or as the old joke goes, the old joke goes of the Jewish child visiting a Christian neighbor and seeing the Christmas tree, and then comes back 5 minutes later to his father saying, I got thrown out of their house. The father goes and says, why was my kid thrown out, to the Christian father? And says, we started asking these questions to make fun of us, saying, how many lights does the tree have? How tall should the tree be? What if the tree goes out? Can the Christmas tree be under a balcony? it would be lost. The joke would be lost in India, because there every person either has to light 51 or 101 flames. The wick has to be a very certain way. It has to be pure. The chants have to be exact. The gestures have to be exact. If not, you have not fulfilled the ritual. That doesn't exist even if in Catholicism. If you drop the chalice, you don't have to go back again, or there's no real. The integrity of ritual is a big part of Hinduism. And therefore, Hinduism will have entire books about how to do every act. And therefore, they will distinguish between the impurity of a nevela and a treifa, as we would call it. They will distinguish between how do you separate from feces before you have to pray. They will have all sorts of discussions about how you have to wash your hands before you do any ritual. They also will have discussions about what body fluids are impure. Now, the truth is they have the exact same list of body fluids we do, because the body only produces so many liquids. That from a Mishnaic point of view, we have the same list. The only difference is they're much more strict on saliva. And they've got a whole list of types of sins and how do you account when you make a mistake. Now, most of this literature you won't find in an American library. You will in Boston. You will find it in the Harvard Library, but you won't find it in BC's library, because there's a whole bunch of literature called the Agamic literature that runs to 60 volumes that is actually the laws of how you do everything, how you do daily ritual and how you do temple literature. That's what most people who are becoming priests study, not the paperbacks of the things we study. The Upanishads are a lot of fun, but this Agamic literature of how you do correct worship and how you get appointed to run a temple is actually what counts. And there's a word that they have for going beyond action and actually requiring intention, and that word is Tantra. Tantra does not mean what it means in the West. Tantra literally means weave. And therefore, when you bring an action and the thought together, that's called a Tantra. And the Agamic literature is filled with what are the kavanot, what are the intentions you have to have when you perform an action. Not every school believes in it needs an action. Some believe you just have to do the action by itself. And the one that says you don't have it is the Nyaya and the Mimamsa schools. So let's backtrack a moment. Any priest, any Hindu leader, almost anybody who majors in these things knows that there are 6 major Hindu philosophies, and you have to know all of them. On some level, they would be the equivalent of halachic reasoning, philosophy, Kabbalah, modern Jewish thought. So the first of them, the Nyaya, is basically the medieval scholasticism of how do you prove God? How do you prove the world around us? It's very similar to the scholasticism of Sadhya or the Rambam or any medieval. It's deeply theistic. Some of the arguments, like the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, we know very well from the West. Those are the quotes that's the books that Sadhya is reading in trying to compare Judaism to Hinduism. He's comparing the Nyaya. And today, if you go to university, people are doing Nyaya and Habermas, Nyaya and Aristotle, Nyaya and analytic thought, the way people will do the Rambam and whatever modern thought for a paper. Mimamsa is where it really gets interesting. Mimamsa is the second of the schools, which is the study of how you determine the law. And they determine it through this whole body called Mimamsa, which are the rules for determining the law. Now, they read the Vedas as having nothing to do with the way you read them from a paperback. For them, the Vedas are instructions on how to do ritual, and the Bronze Age gods disappear. The Bronze Age gods become nothing but datives of where you have to direct a ritual, or they don't have that pantheon. And the rules, some of them we know from Judaism, like klal uprat, prat and klal. But the difference is, if we have a prat and a klal, we follow the klal. If they have a prat and a klal, they follow the prat. Meaning we can line, already in the 19th century, people noticed the similarities, but that doesn't mean the conclusions are the same, but the setup is the same. And they turn almost all of Hinduism into a formal keeping of the law. Most of the professors in the university were such Mimamsa people that that's all they cared about. Because Mimamsa says that there, in some level, Mimamsa has an element like Yeshaya Leibowitz. All that counts is doing the law. We don't care about your piety of it. And therefore, there are many people who are at the university who are the most strict getting up in the morning to bathe in the river and to pray, and strict with washing before they eat and afterwards, who, if you would then say God in the faculty lounge, they would say, if there's a God, or if that matters, because it really didn't. What counted is keeping the law for them. And that's important to know. And there's even now articles in law journals, for example, in the Duke Law Journal, comparing Rav Soloveitchik to Mimamsa. And there's a whole series of people doing degrees comparing Hindu law to Jewish law at this point, as being a very open field. I'm not going to go into the schools of Vedanta, which is the view which is much more closer to the Hasidic worldview, in which late atar panuimine, there is no place devoid of the divinity. Another school. But I want to point out a few other things. First, when you see those statues in a museum, those statues from Hinduism or Buddhism or China tend to be decorations on the outside of a temple. Usually museums get these great lions and these big dancing shivas and things like that. But those are outside decorations. Meaning, for example, Varanasi is a Shaivite city, and the temple in the center of campus is a Shaivite temple. And therefore, it was a simple matseva, and people who wanted to show they were religious carried in their pocket a simple polished stone. They did not have any pictures, images, dancing anything. Even if you would go into American Museum and be told that's what the images are. For them, it was a simple matseva as a Shaivite of a symbol of their religion. Here in America, all the Shaivite temples in Arizona, California, Hawaii tend to pick these huge crystal boulders, these big geoids, as their representation for God, but not the imagery that you would see all around us. Now, even though I told you they don't do sacrifice anymore, that was in ancient times, they still do it somewhat legally or illegally in Nepal. So when I was visiting Nepal, I was in a World Heritage Site, which was supposed to be a museum, and I smelled something and I heard something, and I went down an alley, and it turned out to be a bunch of men in very formal dress, completely governmental, with governmental hats. And there was a workman in front of them that was blowtorching a goat. And then I realized, as they're talking to me and they're inviting me to sit down and join them, I realized I'm being invited to join a sacrifice. So I quickly said, my car is waiting for me, and got myself out of there. But understand that there are people who will always do things to violate it. But you will, there you can, in Nepal, you can still see sacrifice. But one thing you see about the sacrifice is for those who know the laws of slaughtering. Now, once again, I told you they use the same thinking patterns, but not the same answer. When you slaughter an animal in Hinduism, you've got to whack it in a single bolt. If you go back and forth, it's no good. Well, for Jews, if it's holich and heavy, back and forth, it's good. But if you whack it at once, it's no good. They have the same lists. They just may have many times a different valuation of how they're doing it. Okay. Now, the question you want to ask me is like, so are there many gods or not? That's the question. And even worse, you may think, well, the elite do it, but what about the masses or anything else you may think? So let's start with the beginning here. The idea that primitives are primitive and polytheistic goes back to Hume in the 17th century and other Protestants. They assumed that the primitives of the world worshiped many forces. Jews and Papists were materialists who needed ritual, who didn't have a pure view of God, and Protestants are the only people with a pure view of God. But they acknowledge that the philosophers in all religions were like Protestants. But understand that our word is avodah zarah, whether it has imagery or not. There's no question of polytheism in numbers within the Gemara's questions. It's about whether you're using representation or it's not a numerical question in the Gemara. It's a question of Yeravam ben Nevat was doing avodah zarah with a golden calf to one God. But Hume phrased it and other philosophers that it's a question of polytheism, that the primitive people did not know about one principle, even though Hindus from the time of the ancient Upanishads, from 200 before the Common Era, and all the medieval commentaries of India assumed one God, at least on the highest level. Here we assume that they thought there was a rain god and a thunder god, which was never empirically true. And that became the idea of polytheism was not a number, but it was because you couldn't even abstract at all. The philosophic ideas then found themselves in the way we reported ethnographically from India, and therefore almost anything written in the West about India used these philosophic ideas. But we have to be very careful as Jews, because, for example, William Jones in the 18th century writes that Hindus in all their gods are just like the Jews, just like the Israelites, because whatever you're seeing in India, the Protestants saw in the Jews too. And even as late as 1935, the book called Popular Hinduism, the Religion of the Masses, still saw that all Hindus are primitive, they're all animistic, they all are feeling the fact that they can't think abstractly. Little then we're going to say that Banaras Hindu University goes back to the 19th century. It's one of these great British Empire universities. So, meaning there was no desire to even look at it. Even Hegel still puts Judaism as midpoint between the polytheists and Christianity. So avoid using words like polytheism, stick to halachic words like avodah zarah, because there really isn't that sense of primitivism. So what do the masses ever really believe in India? Any ethnographer who's gone in the last, since about late 60s, basically says that every Indian knows that there's one reality behind everything. But that doesn't mean that if you want to pray for COVID, you don't worship the God of health. But they don't assume that that takes away from the one chief God behind everything, but they assume the one God of everything, the divine principle, is not going to come down and help you. So too, in India, everything is personified. So if Hindus own the Kotel, there wouldn't be more than a day before someone would draw a face on it, and then put a clothing on that face, and then put a hat on it, and then create a whole personified image, which they will do to trees, to rocks, to almost anything will get a face, because you want to face the divine. Meaning, if you left a Hindu in charge of a Beit Knesset, they would put a face directly on the parochet, because that's the way. That doesn't mean they think it's a separate God. They'll even personify it, and they may even give it stories, but they believe that there's one principle, one para-Brahman behind everything. But they say you must have representation in order to do it. And this is not because they're westernized or they came to America. This is, you will find in their 12th, 13th century books. You can open up Ramanujan or Shankara, and they will all say, their commentaries, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, they would all say there is one ultimate divine, but the masses need many names. And they'll quote the Rig Veda that says all the different names are really one God. And there's different words in the Sanskrit, because the one God is always called Ishvara, while these minor faces are called devas. Meaning, if, like I said, if you left a Hindu in charge of the Kotel, it would now be the diva of the Kotel. And it would get a name and a story and the whole world of it. Okay. Moving along, since I'm running out of time, is let's move up to the modernization. Know that Hinduism modernized under the British as somewhat of a reaction, the same way Judaism modernized under coming to the Western world. You know, we don't assume that you walk into the Young Israel and go poo, poo, poo and spit on the floor. And you're not coming in with all of the books of refuot that were in 18th century Eastern Europe. And you're not tying strings on your hands and your stomach at the Young Israel of Brookline. The Rav would have cringed at the very mention of any of those words, any of those practices. Know that Hindus, the same way under their modernists, were told those were not the principles of Hinduism. So whether Ramakrishna or Radhakrishnan or any of the others, a huge modernizing movement. And then they formed, as we get to the late 20th century, they formed the way we have denominations, they're going to have denominations. So I assume you've got a Baps Swaminarayan temple in Boston. Those are those big marble Hindu temples. Those are made of Hindus from the Gujarati region of India. They're closest to modern Orthodoxy in the fact that they're very strict legally. They allow no mixing of the sexes, and they have no more home idols and no statues anymore. It's all got to be done in the mind. And they tend to be strict that you can't eat in somebody else's home because it's not sattvic. And they have a whole thing of men's club, sisterhood, youth movement, Gujarati, Sunday school, very much like an American house of worship. You have a different temple, which I know you have a Ganesha Temple in Boston. Ganesha Temples with Gujarati is from Western Northern India. Ganesha Temples are Southern Indian as a way to bring together all the Southerners. Originally, the Southerners all worshipped in sub-denominations. So what they did is they picked Ganesh, who is nobody's home god, who was just a minor diva, and basically said, we're going to create a series of temples that all of us, the equivalent of Litvaks and Glitzianas, Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Anybody who came from southern India now can go to the same place. We're going to give it the name of a diva that nobody had before. And those tend to be funded by that big temple, the Tirupati temple, where they shave the hair. That funds a lot of the southern Hindu temples in America. But understand that, for example, all the rituals are now done in a much more American presentational way. You can't make messes anymore. You can't bring in fruit to rot anymore, with much more instruction to it. And once again, usually with Sunday school and afternoon schools and men's clubs and social events and a wedding hall and all those things. You have other ones that are ashrams, which is another form of modernization, in which you completely take it out of location, and you now have a guru who teaches, who can now reach people online or through traveling, and they belong to a denomination called Smarta, which believes that all you have is the one true deity, but all the other images are just, you pick them whatever you need because you want them. You don't follow a family tradition or anything like that. And so the ashrams is what usually attracts Jews, is because you're attracted to a guru who's teaching you philosophy without teaching any of the more ritual parts. And almost anything, if you visit India, like all the rituals on the waterfront where they wave the lights every day, those are done for the tourists. The same way much of Jerusalem and other parts of Israel are really now being remade in an age of tourism. Know that that stuff didn't exist 50 years ago. It's all being done now for the huge number of tourists as a modern activity. So in conclusion, I'm going to leave you with the Israeli religious poetess Rivka Miriam. Some of you may know her, where when she visited India, she came back and applied it to her understanding of Torah. And she says the secret that divinity is the secret of the draw of India upon Jews. Meeting divinity and its expressions in India brought about a transformation in me. We Jews employ the common expression, there is no place that is devoid of him. In India, I discovered a world where indeed so it is. I discovered a world where there is no one who does not believe. I discovered a world where one sees divinity in every tree and every stone, but also in every deed and every master. The entire world is full of his glory. Okay, and with that, I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Brill. Anyone, I think, hopefully be orderly, just unmute if you have any questions. If anyone has to go, feel free to sign off as we get to 9, but whoever wants to stay on and ask questions, talk for a few minutes. Jerry, I see you unmuted yourself. Do you have a question, Jerry?
Yeah,
oh, I'm sorry, and Miriam.
I actually visited India about 10 years ago for a few days on business. I was in Cochin. I don't know if you got to that area there, but they have a Jewish section in Cochin. However, there aren't very many Jews there because a lot of Jews left India in 1948. And so I was kind of surprised that they are not that familiar with Judaism, as you said at the beginning, because there have been Jews there since King Solomon's time, and I would have expected there to be interaction between the Jewish communities and the Hindu communities over that time, so a lot of this misconceptions and stuff would not be there.
So the Jews left completely, and therefore there was not enough that there was to be written in the textbooks. Jews make up a very small number. I mean, there are more Farsis. There are lots of other religions. I mean, I was in Indonesia last summer, and people were saying, why isn't Indonesia recognizing Judaism? The answer is it recognizes in the Constitution, but Indonesia has more Taoists, more Confucianists, more Hindus, more everything but Jews. The fact that you had a few thousand Jews in 1 billion people
But Jews tend to make themselves known. I mean, Jews don't sit quietly wherever they go. They tend to try and.
So Jews made their mark on, of all things, Bollywood. The same way Hollywood was very Jewish, Bollywood was disproportionately Jewish, but Jews, just like in Hollywood, went out of their way not to proclaim their Jewishness. And it was also your non-religious Jews in Bollywood. You know, it was not a religious, but the point is, they know the parts that were heavily Jewish, there was still a greater respect that Jews made up this city.
Who wants to go next? Miriam, then Philippe. Yeah, okay, Miriam. You just unmute yourself, Miriam.
Sorry. This is off your topic, but could you comment on what it was like living there? Was a modern city, supermarkets?
So this where I was in remote, meaning if you are in Delhi, Mumbai, you have Hyderabad, Bangalore, you have modern supermarkets, modern shopping malls, all of it. I was in Varanasi, which is the equivalent of living in Bnei Brak or Geula.
Uh-huh.
And I clearly put myself there on purpose. So the answer is yes, there were parts of town a half an hour away that did have modern parts and supermarkets and all that. But the point is, here I wanted to be in a part in which every transaction had a story to it. You know, everybody had, you know, I was the equivalent of being a Lutheran who decides they're living in Geula for the year. But actually is most of the new cities, the high-tech cities, Bangalore, Hyderabad, are modern, Western, not religious, and very little of this divinity. Varanasi is the place where they try to bury the dead, where they burn the dead. So it's a very holy city. It's one of the most holy cities for entering the Ganges River. It's also a city in which every street has a temple on it. It's a city given over to the religious life, which had its own problems. But I will tell you, when my wife came to visit me, we did not spend our time there. I know she couldn't take it. We did spend most of our time in the modern cities, even in the shopping malls.
Philippe, very interesting.
Dr. Brill, how does the concept of the priest in mainstream, whatever, Hindu, differ from like Judaism or Christianity and the idea of being consecrated to God?
So the consecration is a Catholic concept.
Right.
For most of them, there is this broad class. Let's start at the basic. The broad class called the Brahmins. They are responsible for most education and religion. But if they perform ritual, you call them a pujari. If they teach, they're a pandit. If they become a professor, they become a professor. So at Banaras Hindu University, most of the professors there are about 85% local Brahmins their families have been teaching in the university since the 10th century, in which professors many times go within families or son-in-laws. We don't have anything like that in Judaism, in which you can point to your plot of land and say, here's where my great-grandfather's house. We're not demolishing it, but it's at the corner of our backyard. Jews, the kid, don't even have anything like that. The long-standingness in which they could be in one place. There's also a different group of those who handle the dead from the Brahmin. Now, in modern India, they allow non-Brahmins to become pujari, pandits, and all that. Some of the more traditionalists fight it, and in many places it's well accepted. So too the question on women's issues. There was a school for women priests, pujari, in Varanasi, and they gave them just a more strict curriculum than for the guys to make sure they could accept it. But in the end, there was trouble. And even that one of the main temples in Varanasi, the priest said, never, it's against our tradition to have a woman priest. While the president of the temple said, oh, I'm all in favor of it. So the in-house debates are very, very similar on this level to things we know. The new cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad have more women priests and more non-Brahmin priests because they're new and modern, and all the more so in some place like in newer cities, like New Jersey cities.
Hi, Rabbi Prof. So I realize there are different strains among the Rishonim, but so do you think that that Hinduism is avodah zarah, or at least under one or more of the conceptions of the Rishonim, or not?
So if avodah zarah means representation, it's 100%. There's no way around it. They are, if they could put up an image, they put up an image. But if there's a question for them to have this structure of worshiping divas, our best approach is really going with the Ramban and anyone who follows that approach, saying it that lo tasun iti and lo yelach is only because I took you out from Egypt, and it's because of tamim tiyu, and therefore for the non-Jews, they can have all this, they can worship the stars and the moon and all those Rishonim in that line, Ramban, Rashba, and others, would be the better choice to think about it within. The Miri you know already. But that would be the direction. The other approach would be those now who want to take the idea of shituf and apply it the same way it's been applied by, everyone from the Shach to the Ramah, the Shach, and others, to now apply that to Hinduism also. That would be the other way to go.
It sounds sort of like the Rambam, when the Rambam talks about like the development of avodah zarah, right? It does sound sort of like what you discussed a little bit, right? In that they need something physical, a physical manifestation to represent God, but they're not actually viewing it as God itself, right?
That's right.
So sort of along the way towards avodah zarah, but not exactly.
So all of us floating around that have come to the same conclusion, meaning everyone, myself, Alon Goshen Godstein, Sperber, Steinsaltz, we've all come to the basic same conclusion. But we're all of us are in, various poskim call us to, just to check base occasionally, but we've yet to get one major, posek to put it all together and issue the final, say, yes, if you hold like this for Christianity, then we're going to, from this point on, go for Hinduism. But we all independently came up with basically pretty much the same analysis.
Yeah, Alan, I heard you give a talk about this about 2 or 3 years ago at Hebrew College. I just wonder where are the talks right now between the Hindus and the chief rabbinate holding?
So that meaning then at this point, it's going down to individuals, because that becomes a question of the rabbinate and what's becoming of the chief rabbinate. So Shlomo Amar was as chief rabbi, and still is very active in interfaith. Shlomo Amar will still appear, not just with Christians and Muslims. He will appear with Hindus and others in a setting, but he hasn't written anything on it. At this point, we're just paying attention to whatever examples in Maser Rav he's doing. And other than that, so the chief rabbinate the current chief rabbis unlike Amar, Metzger, and a number of others, do not show up anymore. They now send a bunch of under rabbis to attend instead. So I don't know what the. So that's where it stands with them. But I assume the first tshuva is either going to come from the Haredi world. There's one Hasidic Rav in Muncie who keeps sending people back and forth to get Neda, or some of the Dayanim in London. It becomes more and more of an issue on many halachas. Because we're so much, in a global world, we have so much more to do with India than we realize.
Okay, on that, I think, thank you, Professor Brill. It was all incredibly interesting, and many of us may be left with even more questions and more things we want to learn and read about. But thank you to the sponsors again, to Ari and to the anonymous sponsor. And if people do have further questions, we can find out how.
You can find me online. I'm on Facebook. I've got a blog. I'm on.
Okay, great.
Wherever
Okay,
you find me.
Wonderful. Okay, so if you want to learn more, read more, and please reach out to Professor Brill. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Have a wonderful night. Good to see everyone.